Have you ever felt like no matter what you do, there's just not enough time in the day to learn your target language? I've been there too. Luckily, with a few small adjustments, I believe it's possible to not just squeeze language learning into your day, but to actually make more time to get the job done. Keep watching and I'll show you how. Hi, I'm Luca Lampariello. I'm a language coach who speaks 14 languages, and on this channel, I help people learn foreign languages faster, more efficiently, and in a fun way. Let's dive right in. My own experience and my experience coaching hundreds of language learners, I've found that when you say you have no time for learning, you're usually making a series of mistakes that only make it seem like you have no time. If these mistakes are addressed, you will likely discover that you had a lot more time for language learning than you originally anticipated. These mistakes are as follows. 1. Telling yourself you have no time to learn. 2. Believing that language learning is all or nothing. 3. Learning when your energy is low and when your energy is high. 4. Waiting for motivation to strike. 5. Making it difficult to get started each day. 6. Not connecting your learning to your other daily habit. Mistake number 1. Telling yourself you have no time to learn. The first thing to tackle is the belief that you have no time at all for language learning. I understand that you likely have lots of commitments, work, family, friends, and more. But I truly believe that if you were to sit down and really examine your typical day, you'd find more than enough productive time each day to seriously learn a language. I'll talk more later about how much time is enough time for language learning, but for now, trust me when I say that your schedule is likely not so packed that you cannot learn at all. It may sound harsh, but in most cases, the thought that you have no time to learn languages is an excuse, or what I like to call a limiting belief. It's simply something you tell yourself to let yourself off the hook for not accomplishing a personal goal. Fortunately, this is something that is fixable with practice. Next time you catch yourself thinking that you do not have time for languages, stop yourself and try to replace that thought with another, such as, languages are not my priority. When you start framing language learning as something you do or do not prioritize, you will begin to feel more agency over whether or not the job gets done. If you think language learning is not my priority, you will naturally stumble upon the follow-up question, how could I make language learning a priority? From there, you will actively start looking for ways to fit language learning into your life. And when you do, I'm almost certain that you will find them. But it all starts with abandoning the belief that you do not have enough time. Once you do that, the real work can begin. Mistake number 2, believing that language learning is all or nothing. Once people realize that they actually do have time for language learning, no matter how busy they actually might be, the next issue is one of ambition. When learning a language, nearly everyone wants to get good, fast. Those kinds of results typically require multiple hours of learning per day, so lots of learners fall into the trap of thinking that that is the cost of success, that they must spend several hours on learning each day, or, well, it's simply not worth it. I'll tell you right now that that mentality is probably the biggest destroyer of people's language learning dreams. They have, as I'll share in a moment, perfectly good time blocks in their day for language learning, but they convince themselves that it's not enough, and therefore they should not move forward. While I agree that spending more time on language learning will generally lead to faster results, the truth is that for most people, spending anywhere from 30 minutes to 1 hour each day on language learning is more than ideal. In fact, I think it's okay to do even less than that, say 15 to 30 minutes, so long as you can do it consistently. 30 minutes of language learning a day for 6 months might sound less impressive than 3 hours a day for 3 weeks, but the reality is that for most people, it's much more manageable and much less likely to lead to burnout. And considering how challenging language learning can sometimes be, burnout is something you want to avoid at all costs. Mistake number 3, learning when your energy is low. Let's say that you're following along and have decided to spend somewhere from 30 to 60 minutes each day learning your target language. This is a great start, but we're far from done. Because now that you have some time for learning, we want to make sure that it's high quality time, which will allow you to learn as much as possible. First, we'll begin with energy levels. This might sound an obvious one, but it's something that is very often overlooked by learners as they go about their language tasks. By the time we reach adulthood, most of us have a pretty good grasp of our general energy patterns. If you identify as a morning person, for example, you already know that you tend to have lots of energy early in the day, which tends to taper off towards the evening. If you identify as a night owl, on the other hand, you know that your most productive and energy-filled hours come in late afternoon and evening. If you fall into one of these common patterns, you should schedule your daily language learning so that it takes place during your peak energy time. I'm a morning person, for example, so I make sure I do my language learning activities right after I wake up. This allows me to learn when I'm most alert, most focused, and in the best possible mood for the task. If, by contrast, I decided to learn at night, I'd likely be tired, unfocused, and quite frankly, disengaged for what I'm trying to do. So, do your best to identify which times of day are your typical high energy periods, and then schedule your language learning at those times. Doing this will literally help you learn more effectively and help you squeeze the most value out of your learning sessions that you would otherwise consider short. Mistake number 4, waiting for motivation to strike. Another common issue I've encountered in myself and others is the insidious desire to let your motivation tell you when it is and it is not time to learn. Let me explain. For most people, whether or not they actually sit down and learn a language is decided by a simple mental flowchart. Do I feel like learning today? If yes, then I'll learn. If not, then I will not learn. Following this formula, motivation is a prerequisite for action. If you have motivation, you take action. And if not, well, maybe you'll try again tomorrow. Thinking of language learning in this way often prompts learners to look for a source of infinite motivation. If they only had such a fuel source, they would learn every single day. I'm sorry to say that such an infinite source of motivation does not exist. There are ways to increase motivation, but no ways to keep it going forever. Heck, even I have days where I do not feel like learning at all. What separates successful learners from unsuccessful ones is the mental flowchart. Whereas yours is probably similar to the one pictured above, mine goes a little bit more like this. Do I feel like learning today? If yes, then I learn. If not, then I will learn anyway. I don't depend on motivation to take action because, as author Hal Elrod states, by taking action, the action itself will produce the feelings and motivation you need to follow through. So don't let motivation be a prerequisite for action. Instead, flip the formula on its head and let action be a prerequisite for motivation. Mistake number 5, making it difficult to get started each day. Have you ever sat down to learn only to realize that you do not know what to do? You do not know where to start. You do not know where any of your resources are. Language learning is not exactly the kind of activity you can do at the drop of a hat. Before you can start learning, you need to prepare and make sure you have everything you need to learn efficiently. Otherwise, you risk wasting all of your valuable learning time getting ready to learn and spend little to none of it productively engaging with your target language. A key trait of a master language learner is the ability to consistently start one's learning sessions every day. To do this, you need to become skilled at reducing any friction in your environment that makes it difficult or less appealing for you to begin a learning session at your scheduled time. So, sometime before each learning session, it's best to do some prep work establishing what you're going to learn on a given day and which resources you're going to learn with. It's also a good idea to regularly clear your learning space of any distractions, such as phones or other devices you're not using to learn. Personally, I like to do this prep work on Sundays before I start my language learning tasks for a given week. I determine exactly what materials and activities I will do each day during that week and also set up my space so that I have everything I need to learn with when the time comes. No matter what language you're learning or which learning activities you like to engage in most, make it easy to start each session is another way to make sure that any time you dedicate to language learning is useful and productive. Mistake number 6, not connecting your learning to your other daily habits. Building on the last mistake of not making it easy to learn, I find that people are often unaware that they can use their existing daily routines to make their language learning routines more natural and effortless. To remove the friction of starting in a clear, repeatable way, I recommend using something called anchoring. Anchoring is done through connecting your daily learning habit to a pre-existing habit that you do each and every day. Since the pre-existing habit is already a well-established part of your routine, it serves as an anchor for your new learning habit. You just need to follow the simple formula of after I do my anchor habit, I will sit down to learn. This formula eliminates friction by introducing automaticity. Your learning habit will always follow your anchor habit, no matter what. If you want to, you can even set anchoring to chain habits together and make it more likely that all of them will take place on a daily basis. Naturally, this habit chain should also include your daily learning sessions. Personally, I've used this technique to build some long and reliable habit chains over the years. Nowadays, for example, this is how I spend my mornings. The first thing I do after I wake up is making my bed. After that, I write in my journal. And after writing my journal, I do meditation for 10 minutes. After meditation, I exercise. And after exercise, I study my current target language. You can use anchoring to create habit chains that are as long or as short as you want. The important thing is to always make sure that you mentally connect your language habit to at least one thing that you do every day without fail. It's that simple. And that's it. Those are the 6 common mistakes preventing you from having enough time to learn a language. Let's quickly review them. Mistake number 1, telling yourself you have no time to learn. Mistake number 2, believing that language learning is all or nothing. Mistake number 3, learning when your energy is low. Mistake number 4, waiting for motivation to strike. Mistake number 5, making it difficult to get started each day. And mistake number 6, not connecting your learning to your other daily habits. If you follow the tips I've given in this video for avoiding or reversing these mistakes, you will find that you suddenly have the ability to create productive language learning time where you may not have had any before. Try them out and let me know how it went by leaving a comment below. And if you'd like to learn even more about how to fit powerful language learning strategies into each and every day, be sure to check out the courses in my Become a Master Language Learner series. I've gotten one course for beginners and another for intermediate learners. So there are useful tips that nearly anyone can apply. Anyway, thanks for watching. And as always, happy language learning.